We're extremely pleased to have His Excellency Oleh Shamshur with us today. Ambassador Shamshur was appointed and became Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States on January 24, 2005. Ambassador Shamshur previously served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2000 to 2004, as head of the European Union Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2003 through 2004, and as Minister Counselor of the Ukrainian Embassy to the Benelux countries from 1998 to 2003. In addition, he was Deputy Chair of the State Committee for Nationalities and Migration of Ukraine, as well as member of the President's Commission on Citizenship from 1996 to 98, and Secretary and Counselor at the Ukrainian Mission to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva from 1993 to 96. He has a very distinguished academic background, having his PhD. He and his wife, married, and they have one child, a 17-year-old daughter. His wife is also an ambassador, and she's the Ukrainian ambassador to the Vatican. And we're so honored and delighted to have Ambassador Shamshur with us today, and we invite you to join us in welcoming him to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you for this generous introduction. So I would like to say that I'm extremely pleased to be here today, and actually, I have learned today that there is a sizable amount of activity going between the university, Brigham Young University, and Ukraine in many areas, and it is extremely pleasant to know, and I hope that this kind of relationship will be developed in many areas, because I am a true believer in the necessity of boosting exchanges between our two countries, and especially between the young people of Ukraine and those of the United States of America. So I would like to, within the time limit, to give not a lecture, but maybe what is called here rather a talk. So I'd like to speak for some 25 minutes, giving my ideas about our relationship, but also about the developments in Ukraine within the context of this relationship, leaving some time for you to ask questions. I presume that would be more productive. So recently, in 2007, we have marked the 15th anniversary of our bilateral relationship. If you look in the retrospective sense, we will see that they've never been in the better shape during those 15 years. And that also mean that we finally managed to develop what we call now, and what our presidents called in 2005, Ukrainian-American Strategic Partnership. Due to the joint efforts during 2 last years, a bit more even, we managed to resolve practically all outstanding problems in our bilateral relations. First of all, those problems which have been accumulated in trade and economy field. First of all, the reinstatement of GCP privileges, granting Ukraine market economy status, then signing of the bilateral protocol within the context of Ukraine accession to the WTO, and finally, sort of the climax, the graduation of Ukraine from Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which was important both, I would say, symbolically or politically, but also for the practical matters, developing of a trade relationship between our two countries. It resulted in a very important increase in our trade. Last year, we crossed the historic mark of $2 billion, so we expect the final figure would be $2.2 billion US for the year 2006. We also managed to develop very intensive political dialogue in a sense of exchanges at all levels between the presidents, visit of Ukrainian Prime Minister, Vice Prime Minister, ministers, delegations of American secretaries coming to Ukraine, as well as exchange between our legislative bodies, national security councils, and many other things. We also, what is very important, managed to develop the approaches and sometimes managed to carry out coordinated actions on a number of very important international problems. I would like to mention fight against terrorism, our common efforts in the field of non-proliferation, combating trafficking in human beings, organized crime, HIV, dealing with Chernobyl disaster fallout, and many other areas. We also managed to develop a very productive relationship in the military field, in peacekeeping. Our soldiers were and still are together in Kosovo, in Afghanistan. We are contemplating cooperation related to Darfur, possibly Lebanon. We were together in Iraq. So regional security areas and questions have been extremely important in our relationship during all the period of their existence, but especially during the latest period. We managed to produce, well, I would say, good results in dealing with the situation in Transnistria, in the areas of other frozen conflicts on the territory of the former USSR. We managed to develop the coordinated approaches. A very important area of our cooperation recently has been the promotion of democracy. I think that Ukraine, and I will try to prove that, has been a very good example of the development of the democratic processes on the territory of the former Soviet Union. We have been cooperating very actively on that in the field of human rights. And finally, I would like to mention that one of the areas where we have been working, and I hope we'll be working very closely, that was the area of promotion of what we call in Ukraine the European choice, that is Ukraine's course towards acquiring full-fledged membership in European and Euro-Atlantic structures. And I would say, summarizing the positive achievements we can be proud of, I would like to mention that we managed to develop solid partnership and develop the invaluable capital of mutual trust, which has not always been the case previously, but now I think that is really a very important achievement of both parties. So the key role in this development was played by the democratic change in Ukraine since late 2004. I think that these developments opened the door of Ukraine into the community of the shared democratic values. And within this context, I would like to underscore the significance of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, something that has been debated or sometimes challenged by many people in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. But I think that in many senses, that was the most important event in Ukraine's contemporary history, definitely in Ukrainian history since 1991. So, and we, in order to assess adequately these developments, we should remember that any revolution, any basic change, it does not create radical change and bring results immediately. Rather, it creates the possibility for change and for producing radical transformations in the society. So, in a way, they're creating rather the momentum for change and radical transformations in the society. So, they should be judged, first of all, by the depth of their impact upon the society. So, in this sense, the importance of the democratic developments and democratic revolution of Ukraine of the late 2004 should not be underestimated, because the importance of these developments shouldn't be overshadowed by mistakes and missed opportunities, something that unfortunately we have seen in Ukraine in 2005, 2006, early 2007. The most important, I would say, influence or the most important opportunity for further democratic development created by the Orange Revolution was that it changed radically the political scene in Ukraine. It changed radically Ukrainian society. And in this sense, any Ukrainian government, no matter what might be his or this government's rather ideology, intentions, history, would be obliged to work within this new democratic framework created by the Orange Revolution and its aftermath. So in this sense, I always challenge those who say that period since 2004 was a period of missed opportunities. Yes, that was a period of missed opportunities. But first of all, that was the period of learning to work under the new democratic rules in a new democratic environment, when each party should and had to learn how to operate within this new democratic milieu. If we look at achievements, which are the most important ones, definitely, first of all, in the area of democratic rights and freedoms. So if you look again, no one would challenge the statement or session that the level of the ensuring human rights, basic or fundamental democratic rights and freedoms in Ukraine has never been better. And that's the result of the development of the Ukrainian society since 1991. And now it's quite obvious that in spite of all the difficulties, definitely Ukraine has finally chosen the way towards the democratic development. Its evolution in a normal, regular, I hope at some stage dull European democratic country, where democratic processes quite often are messy, difficult, but at the same time they are always democratic. And any problems are being decided and resolved through negotiations. I think one of the greatest achievements of our development was that we managed to develop the culture of negotiations and the culture of political compromise. Because our contradictions between political parties have been always resolved through the negotiations and through finding acceptable compromise. What is also important that the striking changes have happened in the field of freedom of expression and media. So I'm not going to elaborate on that. Many of you have been already in Ukraine, and definitely everyone knows that we have a very vibrant, very free media, which is not afraid to discuss anything. And in this sense, I think it was a very important achievement of the Orange Revolution and the 2 years after that. Definitely the best proof of that, and I mean of the whole development, were the election in March 2006, which by any standard were the most free, the most open, transparent election in Ukraine since 1991. And definitely was the best proof of the maturity of the Ukrainian democracy. I think that here we should definitely give credit to President Yushchenko, who avoided any temptation to again resort to so-called administrative resource and made everything possible to make sure that those elections were held in the most transparent, democratic and open way. I mentioned already that we see the radical changes in the political process in Ukraine, in the sense that now we see the existing freedom of political activities, possibility to express plurality of opinions. We have normal parliamentary debate. We have active role of the civil society. What is the most important, if you look at what is happening in Ukraine, no matter how difficult it's happening, sometimes you can even speak of the chaotic development, everything is being done according to the constitution, according to the rules of the democratic society. No matter what might be the preferences or maybe expectations of this or the other camp. Definitely the major challenge now is the is the necessity to work out the workable and efficient interaction between all power centers in the society. This task has appeared or actually moved to the front of the societal development because of the changes in Ukrainian society and also changes in the constitution of Ukraine. Unfortunately, this constitution was a sort of the political compromise during the period of the Orange Revolution, and definitely in many senses was not well prepared. It left a lot of lacunas in the legal sense, in the formation of our, and functioning, first of all, of our political and state institutions. Now we have to make the best use of the Constitution and definitely close those lacunas and ensure the efficiency of the governance. But there is a common understanding that it should be done on the basis of creating a system, a working system of checks and balances, when there would be no possibility for any party, any political force to usurp the political power and to act unilaterally. That's the challenge. There is an understanding among all important actors in the political process that there is no other way but to find the common ground. And again, a very important role is being played by the president, who actually acts as the major force for finding the political compromise which would ensure the resolution of the existing conflicting situation, finding out the way of the differences, and to ensure that the country moves on along this democratic path. How it will be done, it still will be seen. There are different series. Definitely, we are waiting impatiently for the very important decisions of this Constitutional Court, which I presume will take place, well, more or less sooner better, definitely than later. Definitely, there would be some legislative activities, but if you look at the legislative activity and also learn from what has been happening recently, there is a need to work out those laws in consultation between different political forces, between the current so-called anti-crisis governing coalition, but also taken on board the ideas of the president and of the opposition. That's the only recipe for creating a viable political system. So summing up, I would say if you look at the political development, we are moving forward, no matter how difficult is that. The independent Ukraine, as I've said, had its ups and downs, but definitely there is no way that it would return to the Soviet kind development, some kind of the guided democracy or autocracy. Definitely is going to develop along the democratic path. And I would like to mention, I think here it would be very appropriate, that compared to some other countries which share some, say, geopolitical space with us, Ukraine has chosen to create a very open democratic society only in the sense of making it possible to preach any religion and to profess any belief. So we have more than 55 religions professed in Ukraine. We have 30,000 religious communities active in Ukraine, and we have also very clearly stated the separation between the church and the state, so that everyone will be absolutely free to profess his or her religion, and we think it's a very important part of our democracy. Sorry, take some water. So the second part, which is interesting in Ukraine, is that in spite of all political turbulences, the economy has been developing very well. I would say in some sense it has been even exceeding our expectations. So in last year, the figure of the GDP growth was around 7%. For the next year, the prognostications are more reserved also, first of all, due to the fact that the prices for gas and the energy resources have been growing, but still they fall within the range of 4 to 5%, which is also very well. So many branches are booming, I would say. The industrial output was growing 6%, including machinery construction 12%, metallurgy 9%, energy generating 8%, food 10%, and so on and so forth. So what is actually also important, that the development is not limited to the traditional heavy industries. Of course, Ukraine is very much export-oriented economy. A large amount of the GDP is created in export sectors. Most important are metallurgy, so metals, ferrous, non-ferrous, chemicals production, food and agriculture as that. But we have been increasingly active in many high-tech areas. First of all, I would mention aerospace and aircraft building. So I've already given the example. If you ever heard to the XM stations, you should know that you are listening to that due to the American satellite, but the satellite that was launched by the Ukrainian rocket, because that was a part of the program which is called Sea Launch. That is joint venture between the United States, Russia, Ukraine, and Norway. We are providing launchers, and the whole track record, in spite of the disaster during the last, not disaster, but the actual malfunction during the last launch, it was moving quite well, and it shows the potential. There is growing interest on the part of the American companies in the development of this kind of cooperation. So even now exceeds our producing manufacturing possibilities. And also IT technologies, telecommunication, that's the areas where there is growing interest in Ukraine in business community. Very telling example, last week a Swedish bank bought out one of the biggest Ukrainian banks for almost $1 billion. So that's, I'm mentioning it's not only for the fact, but for the quote. The Swedish banker who actually bought the Ukrainian bank said that he saw himself compelled to enter the market of a new European tiger as expediently as possible. And I would also mention that recently a number of major rating agencies have been also improving considerably Ukrainian credit ratings, which is a very important indicator. Definitely the privatization process would be coming to completion, and we hope that everything will be done as transparently, as open as during the selling out of the greatest and one of the greatest in the world steel mills in the Kryvyi Rih, which was sold for roughly $5 billion. That was an enormous sum, which exceeded the original bidding considerably, and we hope that the finalization of privatization of big companies will be done in the same manner. What is also important to mention, speaking about economy, that finally the economic growth has started to trickle down to the population. The living standards have been improving, salaries have been risen, incomes have been growing, although definitely not at the rate we would like it to see. Finally, I would also like to mention that actually also we have important developments in the geography of our trade, economic ties. And now our greatest trade partner, these are the countries of the European Union. So we account for more than 33% of our trade. So recently we have also seen the direct foreign investment into Ukrainian economy growing. The growth was 18% last year, and now they constitute around $20 billion, which is still a figure which is not very impressive, but the dynamic is quite good. So we hope that with the further improvement of the investment climate in Ukraine, which has been happening, and our accession to the WTO, which definitely will take place this year, we will see more foreign investment coming into into Ukraine, also from the United States. So I think that the figures we have in our bilateral trade is definitely far from being too encouraging, because the dynamic is great. So last year 50% of growth in trade, but the figures 2 billion, it's more or less what we have with Belarus, for example, or with Hungary. Direct investment 1.5%, so really much less than we might have expected. We understand, I stress again, that the court is largely in our ball is largely in our court to further improve investment climate, to improve business confidence. But again, one of the reasons why I'm here and will be speaking tomorrow, just to give more information about what's happening in Ukraine and to show that the possibilities for doing business in Ukraine have been continuously and steadily improving, in spite of some difficulties which we had recently, but which we also working on to eliminate. So finally, what I would like to mention, these are, two issues, that is foreign policy, two major I would say objectives that we have in Ukraine. As I said, they might be united in one notion of the European choice. That is the policy towards integration, full-fledged integration into the European and Euro-Atlantic structures. As far as the European integration is concerned, internally the situation looks very favorable. So the opinion polls are constantly giving the figure of 60 to 70% of approval rates of European integration among the Ukrainian population. I think that they have been doing pretty well in the implementation of EU-Ukraine action plan. At least these are the assessment on both sides. The most important breakthrough was made in democratic development, but also in development democratic institution, but also it applies to our development in economy and also development in some particular areas, what is called sectoral development. We hope that after accession to the WTO, we would be able, and actually it's already agreed, we will move towards negotiations on the free trade area with the European Union, which would be a major step forward. Plus, we nearly started negotiations of the new so-called enhanced agreement, which would replace a current partnership and cooperation agreement with the European Union, and we hope in many areas will bring us even closer to the European Union. Over there, the major obstacle is the lack of consensus in the European Union on Ukraine's prospects, and definitely the difficult situation within the European Union itself with the institutional crisis they have been facing since the latest negative voting on the referendums on the European Constitution. But again, I would say, even not cautiously optimistic about Ukraine's prospects joining European Union, because I think the most important now is create the critical mass of change within Ukraine, and now especially the economic field, when it would be extremely difficult for the European Union to find counter-arguments not to give European perspective to Ukraine. The second issue, that is definitely NATO. Over there, I think it's absolutely within the reach. Unfortunately, we missed the opportunity to join membership action plan last year. I think that the most important issue is creation of the consensus at the level of the political elite, which would then consequently translate it into the improved acceptance on the part of the population. Over there, the figures are not very encouraging, so it's 20 to 30% of support. The most important part, apart from the consensus at the level of the political elite is definitely providing more objective information about NATO, its objectives, the kind of relationship it has developed with Ukraine. Everything is doable with the political leadership. Over there, again, President is at the forefront of this work. I think that we are moving towards the agreement among the irreversibility of the course towards membership in NATO, but the gist of the problem is definitely lies now in the, I would say, tempo of the speed of this movement. And over there, I think, on the one hand, we should be working on forging this common understanding, the understanding of the common goal. At the same time, we shouldn't be losing time and continue to intensify our cooperation with NATO in every possible field. But again, I see personally no alternative neither to Ukraine's membership in the European Union nor in the membership in the Euro-Atlantic structures in NATO. Very quickly, because I'm just about to cross the self-imposed limit, about the development of our relationship. So I think the prospects are looking pretty good. Where I would like as an ambassador and Ukraine would like to concentrate the efforts, well, I would figure out maybe three fields. So first of all, definitely we would like to further political dialogue. That's for sure. So we have already moved into the phase when meeting, we are not simply meeting and expressing different views, but we are definitely working on working out, elaborating common approaches, and in many cases taking joint actions. And I would see a lot of possibility for that in future, so that we can further add further meaning to the notion of the strategic partnership between our two countries. So secondly, that is definitely the enhancement of the economic cooperation, growing trade, growing investment. I already spoken about that, but in many senses that would be the necessary basis for the development of the overall development of the bilateral relationship between our two countries. Among some interesting ideas in this field, I think we might think about after Ukraine joining WTO, move to the negotiations of the creation of the free trade area between our two countries, but again, it's conditioned by the membership in WTO. So finally, and what I would like to underscore especially here, that is the establishment of the vibrant network of bilateral relationship at all levels. Now I'm not speaking about political relationship, but speaking rather in terms of people to people. And I mean, first of all, the relationship between educational institutions, between municipalities, between states and regions in the United States and Ukraine, enhanced sister city cooperation, so all kinds of exchanges, which would be absolutely important for Ukraine in terms of, I would say, and first of all, it relates, of course, to young people, to bring more young people from Ukraine to the United States to study, to learn, also to see how the democracy works. That would be a great educational experience, but also to bring more Americans to the United States, by the way, also to study, but also to learn more about Ukraine and sometimes to surpass or to overcome some misconceptions which some people have, and I presume those of you who have been already Ukraine has long ago shed off. Well, what I would say that I think that if we look at the prospect of our relationship, definitely it looks quite good. At the same time, it's also quite definitive that those further changes wouldn't come per se. We have to apply a considerable amount of work on both sides. And again, I would like to underscore that I would very much like to see it not simply the work of the politicians or diplomats or even businessmen, but I would like to see more and more involvement of the non-governmental organizations, of the people on the both sides of, they say, the pond, so meaning that the Atlantic Ocean definitely shouldn't be a obstacle for further development of the relationship between our countries, which have every reason to believe that they would not simply remain at this current stage of development of partnership, but see this partnership growing in strength and growing in meaning in every possible sense. So thanks a lot, and I'm ready to take the questions.
Questions, if you'd please just wait for the microphone so we can get your question recorded for the audio. Any questions?
You mentioned your prospects for branching into high-tech development for Ukraine. What are the prospects of agricultural development as a larger part of the economy than it is now?
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, I would say the Ukrainian agriculture is the usual, as they say, suspect for boosting economic development. So the prospects are still great in a sense that the potential is there in terms of the soil. It's a common knowledge. So what we are facing now is the necessity to reform the agricultural sector. Because at this stage we are a bit, if I may use this word, stuck in the development, because on the one hand, the land titles were distributed, but there is still a moratorium which prevents the land becoming a commodity. And without that, definitely we won't be able to create a functioning land market. So I think, first of all, the problem is structural. What is also related to that, to bring new technologies, new machinery to Ukrainian agriculture. And definitely in this case, that would be a booming sector of the economy. Moreover, that even without that, Ukrainian agriculture has been doing increasingly well, and has already become one of the major exporters of grain in Europe and in the world. I think last year we were the sixth. I might be mistaken, but definitely we are within the leading group of grain exporters. And there is no doubt that if we manage to restructure agriculture, which is inevitable, we should do that, that would give a very important boost to agriculture. First of all, maybe grain, corn, so plant agriculture, but definitely it will be followed by cattle.
Thank you for coming today. My question, I was wondering if you could discuss Ukraine's views on President Putin's power centralization and also the recent, I guess, verbal exchange about a new Cold War that happened last week.
Before I answer, actually, coming back to agriculture, one of the niches which Ukraine might develop is definitely organic agriculture. We have already a lot done in this field and think that we should be doing more on that. Coming back to your question, actually, I can give you the Ukrainian assessment. That's, I would say, more prerogative of the president, first of all, prime minister, minister of foreign affairs. But I can tell you actually my assessment of that. So definitely, if we look at the relationship in general, on the one hand, I would say put it this way. So our ambition in terms of the development of bilateral relations is very simple. So we would like to have with Russia normal, regular, working bilateral relationship. For that, definitely there is a need for the goodwill on both sides. So Ukraine, tries to resolve all the issues through negotiations, not resorting to blackmail or anything like that. And definitely we strongly disapprove of any attempts even to use this language for Ukraine. Because even if we are ready to negotiate, there is a definitive bottom line, which is our national interest, and it applies to all fields. If I can go back to the statement of President Putin, definitely our view of the world, of the Europe, of the U.S. role in this process is, I would say, not simply different, it's radically different from that was expressed by President Putin at the Munich conference. So we see our country as a responsible member of the international community, and in future the member of the Euro-Atlantic community as well. And for example, as it goes to the OSCE, we think that this organization definitely needs reform, but as far as its role of promoting human rights, due electoral processes, we have already, in our experience, experienced the positive influence of the OSCE. So our view of the world is definitely different from that was expressed by President Putin in Munich.
I just have a question about the globalization of the Ukrainian economy. It's obvious that globalization brings great benefits, both economic prosperity and world power, but there's also significant cultural and social costs that comes along with globalization and westernization. And I guess I have two questions. The first is, what do you feel are the greatest costs of globalization in Ukraine? And the second question is, how do you feel the benefits of this globalization and westernization outweigh the costs, if they do?
Well, actually, I might combine the two questions. So I think that globalization is a kind of, if you wish, like sun or wind, so you cannot fight it because it's happening. And your best option is definitely to take the best advantage of what has been happening. If we speak about Ukraine, so I would say that, well, again, surprisingly to what many people think about Ukraine. So Ukrainian economy is pretty open. Actually, as I said, we are very much dependent on exports. That's, if I'm not mistaken, around 60% of GDP is being produced to the exports. Secondly, well, all history of our joining WTO is definitely the history of opening up Ukrainian economy. And that was a big struggle between those who were willing to continue cozy, but from the point of view of the country development, inefficient production and life within their protected segments, and those who definitely see the benefit of opening the country for the competition. So in this sense, that was the logic of Ukraine's developing and joining WTO. And the fact that finally all major political forces supported this process was actually very indicative of the way of thinking that has developed in Ukraine, although there is still in some areas very strong lobbies which would like to preserve the status quo. And that, I would say, more or less the answer where we see ourselves. So the benefit, although there is also an understanding that it would be a painful process because many industries will suffer, but again, there is no other way to create a modern economy apart from being open to competition. Of course, there can be some details, some discussions, but the general development is definitely like that. Even if we speak about our industrial and military complex, which is an important part of Ukrainian economy, has been traditionally. Still, we are one of the biggest exporters of arms in the world. We think that, again, being more open, looking for new relationships within the NATO countries would help to improve the standards, the quality, and also finally will open up the markets for Ukraine. That's, I would say, in my perception, the pros definitely outweigh the contrast. But as far as the negative side is concerned, so it's more or less, I presume, as in any other country. So the things which are coming with globalization, so maybe overexposure to some, well, not very healthy trends, but I would say that is, I don't think that Ukraine is in this sense any different from any country, be it the United States or Europe. Maybe the scale differs per country. Thank you.
Yes, human trafficking has been a large problem for the Ukraine. It's been one of their major exports. Can you explain maybe some measures that have been taken to stem the tide of human trafficking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's definitely it's a serious problem. again, in terms of, well, as far as I was dealing with this problem, more or less, well, due to my professional activities before, and I keep interest now. So here I would also like to caution a bit, even those who, well, give some figures. So definitely it's a very important problem. But the figures I often see, which are being produced to show that the amount of so-called trade from Ukraine, I don't think that they're always accurate, and to some extent that backfired in the sense that every Ukrainian, well, young woman trying to go to the West is being perceived as a possible object of sex exploitation. So here I would like to caution to be cautious without figures. But there is a problem. What is being done? So we understand the scope of the problem. So I think we have developed pretty good legislation. To our surprise, when we tried to compare our legislation with the European one, just to learn the lessons, in some senses, our legislation was more to the point than that in many European countries. So secondly, we understand that the devil is now in implementation of this legislation. And recently in the law enforcement community, we created a network of divisions dealing specifically with this issue. So it's being dealt with very responsibly. On the other hand, we have had a series of prevention campaigns, so public information to inform the potential victims of trafficking in women or in human beings about the hazards and the dangers. So unfortunately, again, as a professional in this field, I don't see any immediate solutions for this problem, because the